Man, good morning and welcome to Village. How are you this morning? Everybody okay? Good. We're going to jump right in. First, and just let me say this real quick. I mentioned this in worship, but this has been a tough week around us a little bit, but can I just thank you as a village for how you've rallied around these families and man, just above and beyond. So grateful. These are the days and the weeks that I'm even more proud just to be part of this village. So I just want to say thank you from the families and from me, just thank you for how you did that. That's just, and in the weeks to come, you all know this. The weeks to come are even more important. So man, we'll just continue to try to let you know as those felt needs come, how we can continue to rally around these families and just come alongside them. But seriously, sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for how you've been doing that because it really fits with this series that we've been in called Grown Ups. I mean, there's certain things that grown-ups do, and specifically there's certain things that grown-up Christians do that we don't just do, but that we constantly reevaluate, take inventory, and try to get better and better and better at. And so we've been in this series called, we started a series called Grown Ups, and really though, we said this every week, is that basically we should probably be calling this series Growing Ups, right? Because one of the things we've said is that grown up is not somewhere we get, but grown up is somewhere we're going, isn't it? That this is a journey, this is a process. All of us know this. We said in the very first week a couple things about being grown up is this. Number one, grown-ups know that we're never finished growing up, okay? We always know there's room to grow, and if you didn't know there's room to grow, ask the people around you. They'll tell you. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but just ask people, right? There's always room for us to grow in every arena of our lives, but that same thing is true for us spiritually in our faith. And then the second thing, though, that we know, and this is the little more difficult part, is that growing up requires work. This is the part we don't like much, but it's also true for any area of life. If there's an area that you want to improve in, mature in, or even try to perfect, right, it requires work. You have to put that work in. And while for us spiritually, God says, I'm going to provide you everything you need, right? That's what he does, but there is a responsibility on our parts to take those provisions and do something with them in our lives, to apply them. The application is up to us. And so it's very critical that we do the work in all areas and arenas of our life if we want to grow up. And so we've kind of been talking about that. And we've realized too that there's just some things that you can do as a child, right, that don't translate the same later in your grown-up life. It's a necessary thing that we grow up because it's just not the same. A recent fad reminded me of this very lately, and I don't know if you've seen this, but it's a fad going around of adults recreating childhood photos. Have you seen this? If you haven't, I'm going to make your day right now, okay? Because this is great. It's adults actually, they pick up photos from their childhood, right? Like this one, like here's a photo, right? Two brothers, just a sweet childhood photo. And then 20 years later, they give you this, right? A little disturbing, right? But funny, humorous, right? That's funny. Or you've got these three brothers. Hey, guys. And then they give you this. What up? Mom and Dad. And then they post it on the World Wide Web. And it's there for everyone to share, right? Here's these two brothers. I love these brothers right here. Hey, brother. And if you can believe it, they found man-sized overalls. And, hey, brother. It's very, very troubling. And then there's actually these two guys. I love these two guys. All right, these two guys, sweet boys. I mean, just sweet children in picture. And they give you this, hey! But then they didn't stop there. They gave us even more. They have this photo, same guys, right? That turned into this. Hey! Absolutely love this. And I'm going to stop there, but these guys actually have a whole series of photos. It's very, very disturbing, and then that's what I would say. While humorous, there is an absolute awkward quality if this was the way we chose to do life, isn't it? If we stayed mired in our childhood, this could lead to some really awkward moments. I don't encourage you to, and there's other, you know what, at your own risk, Google image this, okay? Because there are some photos that are so much more disturbing than these of children, and but that's on you, right? But we all get this, that there's this need to grow up. And as Christians, and I'll just be honest, we've specifically been challenging us as Christians in the room. So if you're here and you're not a Christian, we said a couple things. One, you kind of get a pass, right? We're actually downloading all kinds of ammunition to you for the next time your Christian friends say, you know what, you need to grow up. You can say, hey, you know what, so do you. And I've got a list of things, okay? So if you're not a Christian, man, just take good notes because this is going to help you later. But we also believe this, that if you're not a Christian, that we believe these teachings of Jesus are so, this is what made people drawn to Jesus. He was so practical. Before he ever died on the cross and rose again, thousands of people would come out to hear him. They were drawn to him, not because of his salvation yet, because that hadn't happened, right? He hadn't given us that yet. But they were drawn to him because of his practical teaching. The teachings that he gave were so useful and beneficial in their lives. They had never heard teaching like this. In fact, there's one story of the Roman soldiers who were actually supposed to go arrest Jesus, and they show back up and they didn't do it. And when they get back, they're like, the leader's like, why didn't you just take him? And they're like, well, have you heard this guy preach? He's really good. And they're like, we just couldn't. And it's just this unbelievable story. I mean, but people were just drawn to his teachings. And so we realized the need to be growing in this, and so did people at that time. And we've kind of been springboarding off of a couple of scriptures. The first week we said, one was in the book of Luke. A guy named Luke wrote this book about Jesus' life. And in Luke 2:52, he said this about Jesus. He said, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. So if Jesus is the guy we're following, which especially for his teachings, but then after he died and then rose again, that's when this thing took off. They're like, man predicts his death, comes back to life. Yeah, I'm following that guy. And so people just bought into all of his teachings, and this was one of the foundational things Jesus did. He grew in wisdom and stature in favor with God and man. And so the first Christians, they took off in this same direction. And we looked at another verse in another book that the same guy, Luke, wrote, a book called Acts. In Acts 2:42, it says the first Christians, they were so excited about this new way of Jesus that they devoted themselves. They didn't dabble in this, they devoted themselves to the teachings of the apostles, right? Jesus' teachings, because that's what the apostles were teaching, and to fellowship, to being together, to relationship with one another. They took this incredibly seriously. And so we've been trying to take this incredibly seriously too. We've said in this series, as Christians, sometimes we need to pause, take inventory, and see how we're doing, because if you don't, there's this danger in life in any arena, is that we tend to drift, don't we? As human beings, we tend to drift from our goals, from our dreams, and even some of the things that are most important if we don't pay them close attention. And so every once in a while, we like to pause and just try to pay close attention to those things. And last week, we looked at the first one where Jesus grew in wisdom and the first Christians devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings. We looked at knowledge. And we said, this is so critical that we get into the knowledge of Jesus, into the Bible, into the scriptures. But we also said that if you read that or do that incorrectly, that it can be just as damaging. Because knowledge by itself can just lead to arrogance, right? Do you know some know-it-alls? You got some know-it-alls in your life, right? And that happens to us as Christians. If all we do is download knowledge, okay, if we just pack it in there, it just becomes dangerous because it makes us arrogant and judgmental towards others. And so we said the important thing is as you download this knowledge, and the tagline we said is it's not what you know, it's what you do with what you know. That we have to be applying that first to our lives, right? We like to take good teachings and we like to apply it to other people's lives, don't we? That's our favorite thing, because it's really easy for us to see other people's junk. It's really hard for me to see my junk in the mirror, isn't it? And that's why Jesus set up other people as your mirror. I don't know if you knew that. So when you see junk in somebody else, it's really your junk, all right? That's just how it works. So the next time you're tempted to go, man, you know what that guy's junk is? Be like, uh-oh. My junk, right? Read Romans chapter 2. It's all in there. All right, so let's go check that out. But he set that up, and we said we've got to be very careful as we get that knowledge that we apply it to us first, and then we take it and we use it to bring light and hope to the world. And so we looked at knowledge last week, and that was a big one. But the other one that we've talked about is that Jesus also grew in favor. And when you read that Acts chapter 2 scripture, it says that they grew in fellowship, and at the end it says, and they were in favor with all people. So this other thing was just this huge idea to Jesus, and it was this. It was relationships, right? This huge idea to Jesus was relationships. And so today, for just a few minutes, we're going to talk about this. I can tell you're excited, right? I can tell you're excited about relationships. But Jesus said, this whole life, it comes down to two relationships, right? It was such a big deal that he put it into his greatest commandment. He said the whole thing, it comes down to the way that we love God and then the way that we love people. And in fact, he said the two are basically the same. He said, here's the first one, love God, and the second one's just like it, love people. And in other words, how well you love God, right? When you love God well, you're going to love people well. And how well you love people is a sign of how well you're loving God, that those two things just kind of go together. They were that important to him. So when I love others well, that's what it looks like to love God well. And relationships are a really big deal. So we're going to talk about relationships. And so here's my question for you. How are you doing relationally? Exactly what I expected. Okay, that's great, right? How are you doing with this? Okay, quick show of hands. And church person or not a church person, right? This applies to all of us. So you can take this quiz with me right here. Quick show of hands. How many of you have ever had a problem with another person? Ever? Just get it up there. There it is. There it is. And I recognize that person may be the person sitting next to you. I got that, right? But it's okay. You might be theirs, all right? So just go ahead, that's good, okay? Every one of us, we can all kind of get there. And even though we come from different backgrounds, different beliefs, and different experiences, all of us, regardless of our stories, this is the one thing that we hold in common. But we also hold something else in common. Everyone I've ever talked to is that every one of us wants better relationships. We all want better relationships, even if we're in good ones. And maybe you're sitting here going, for those of us that maybe say, hey, you know what, I'm in a really good marriage right now. I'm happy with my marriage. But even though I would hope that even for me, I believe I'm in a happy marriage. You have to ask my wife. But I'm happy. So, but even in that, I realize there's places that could be even better, right? Because happy as we are, there's days when it's tough. And there's days I could do better. For those of you parents with children, maybe you have a super relationship with your child, but you probably realize that there's days just based on our daily interactions that this could be even better, right? That I could do this better. Or maybe you're in a situation where you've lost a loved one or someone close or a friend, and that connection just feels gone. And you're just thinking, man, is there even a way to reconnect? There's got to be a way for me to live inside these connections. Or maybe you're just single out there and you're looking for that special someone. And so you come here in the mornings and you get around the coffee machine out there and you just put out the vibes, right? We've noticed, all right? Man, do your thing, all right? Just do that, all right? Trust me, we've all noticed that. I did that for years. But we all want better relationships. And here's why. Because relationships are the stuff that life is made of, right? It's the thing that brings us the greatest meaning and the greatest joy. It just is. And now research has been showing this time and time again. Research, actually even secular psychological research, is showing this, that happiness over time, long-term joy and happiness, is not the result of wealth, success, achievement, or popularity. But long-term happiness and joy actually comes from the presence of deep and meaningful relationships. Your relationships will impact your life above all else. Our relationships. So today, we're going to take a little inventory. We're going to kind of pause and check, and we're going to see how we're doing. And here's how we're going to do this, okay? So just so you can know how the fun's going to go. All right, we're going to take a question. It's a question that maybe if you've been around here long enough, you've heard us use before. We're going to use a question, and then we're just going to take this one small passage of scripture by a guy named Paul, where he gives us some critical areas in our relationships to kind of check on. And if we're serious about growing our relationships, and we should be, right? We should be, because we just said relationships are what life is made of. So our relationship with God and our relationship with others. So if that's what's at stake, right? If life is what's at stake, then this is something we should be absolutely serious about. And it's something we should all want to get better at. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read the passage. I'm going to ask our secret question, and we're going to see how we're doing. Okay, first I'm going to give you the question, okay? And we could probably just stop here, because you could take this question and use it, and maybe that would just change your life. But here's the question. And the question is kind of a relational inventory question. It's this: what's it like to be on the other side of me? What's it like to be on the other side of me? I heard a guy ask this years ago, and it just blew my mind. He was like, not what do you think other people think you're like, but actually take this question and go to other people and ask them this. And give them the ability and the room and the freedom to answer. What's it like to be on the other side of me, right? That's fun. Y'all just want to quit there? Okay, good. Let's keep going. All right, let's keep going. Now, we're also going to look at a verse, and this is passage, a couple of verses, really short, but it's packed with this amazing stuff, okay? So if you got your Bible, you want to open there. If you got your flip phone, you want to scroll there, whatever. We're going to be in the book of Colossians, okay? It's a letter a guy named Paul wrote. Paul wrote all these letters in the New Testament and to all his friends, and they're named kind of for the cities that he wrote to. And so this is to his friends in Colossae. And Paul is talking to them about how to have healthy relationships. He says, this is so critical. Jesus built his whole kingdom on our relationship with him and then our relationship with others as we hand him off to others. These relationships are critical. They're crucial. You got to get this part right. And here's how you can check and see how you're doing. So this is in Colossians chapter 3, and we're going to look in verses 12 and 13. And then we're going to ask, what's it like to be on the other side of me? Okay, we're going to check this out. Okay, here it is. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly beloved, clothe yourselves. Now, I love this. Paul was always using these relevant examples, right? He knew that people were going to put on clothes. He said, so let me get right in your wheelhouse with you. This is absolutely crucial, okay? And clothing, as it is now, it was then very important to people. Fashion's always been a big deal. And so Paul says, hey, you're right, this is a big deal, and this is huge. So how you go out spiritually in your fashion matters. And these are the things you need to clothe yourself with. You need to intentionally put these things on. And he runs off this list. He says this, compassion, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And then he goes on. And he says, and above that, bear with each other and forgive one another if anyone has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord has forgiven you. And Paul says, hey, the next time you need to check up on your relationships, here's a list, right? And the list does you no good if you just read it, but you got to get in this thing and do some application. So this morning, we're going to get in this thing, and we're going to see how we're doing, because this doesn't help us if we don't define it, right? So let's talk a little bit about the first one. Compassion. Paul uses this word in the very beginning, and he starts with this one. And this is an interesting one because in the actual Greek, this word right here, it's great, super. This is actually the word for your bowels. Paul said, start relationships with your bowels. My mom always told me, do not start relationships with your bowels. It's a terrible way to start a relationship. She'll never come back, right? So, but Paul says this, and basically what he's talking about your gut, right? There's a reason he says this is a basic gut check for our posture towards people. And he's talking about what is it that you feel the first moment when you see different people come into your screen, into your lens during the day. Think about it for a moment. When you see that person walking down the street, what's your gut feeling about that person? Just random people, right? Or maybe somebody you meet in the store. What's your gut feeling? Or how do you respond to a person who looks different than you, or someone who acts in a way you don't approve? Or what's your first response to the person who cuts you off in traffic? Gut check, right? Man, I bet they have something really important to do. God, just help them today, right? Gut check, right? I don't know if you're having compassion on those people. I don't know how that's working for you, right? But he's actually here, he's going for the gut check response. And the question is basically this: what's our posture toward people in general? How are we responding to people on our first interactions? Do you approach people from a posture of compassion as if that person is deserving of belonging and love? Is that your first thought about people? Man, I wonder if they have somewhere to belong. I wonder if somebody loves them. Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. All right, right. I mean, this is the struggle, right? And this is the deal, because a lot of us, that's not. I mean, for a lot of us, we do what's called snap judgments, don't we? We have knee-jerk reactions, or we have these gut responses sometimes to people based on information that we don't even have, right? We're like, you know what? I bet that guy is this, or she's one of those, or right? And Paul's saying, man, we've got to change that gut check. We've got to go forward with compassion, not with judgment. And we see this play out in the life of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 9, it says this: when he saw the crowds, these are the people that he didn't even know, people who weren't like him at all, maybe didn't even believe what he believed. But when he saw the crowds, he had compassion, right? Same word, compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless and like sheep without a shepherd. And Jesus' first response, even though he was God in the flesh, was not to feel superior or critical of other people, but it was to have compassion on them. And this was a fairly new idea in the first century because, right, if there was one thing the ancient world lacked, it was compassion and mercy. One guy, I read a commentary where this guy was talking about this in the first century. He said, the sufferings of animals were nothing to them. The sick were generally ignored. There was little or no provision for the aged. The treatment of the disabled was unfeeling and cold. But this is how they saw people that they felt were beneath them. And Jesus is actually the one credited with bringing compassion into the first century. The gut check, how we respond to people on our first interaction. So Paul begins with this idea of compassion, a gut check towards our posture toward others. So here's the question. How are you doing with this? What's it like to be on the other side of your compassion? Okay, you can answer that in your head. That's good. All right, right? So we're going to keep moving, man. Yeah, you just keep scoring your head, right? Just do that. And let me just tell you up front, none of us are getting a perfect score on this, okay? Nobody's getting a perfect score. So just know you're among some of the worst relational people I know, okay? So just know that. These people are terrible at it. They're awful. No, I'm just kidding. You're among some great people. But we're working on it, right? None of us are great at this yet. That's why we're growing up in this. The second one is kindness. And I want to make something really clear right at the beginning of this right now, that this is not the same thing as just trying to be nice. This is not the same thing as just trying to be nice. I recently read this true story about a young girl who went to see her boyfriend, and she found him icing a cake, and it was remarkable to her because he had never baked anything in his life. And so she was anticipating something really romantic and wonderful coming out of this moment, but then this is what he actually said to her. I actually want to break up with you, and I baked this cake so that you might feel better. So he was trying to be nice, right? He was trying to be nice, but that's not very nice. It's like I was speaking at a mission project this one week. We were there for a whole week, and so I would have been speaking every night, start on Saturday. And like Thursday night, this one youth pastor comes up, and he was older than me, and he'd just been, just no emotion, just stone-faced all week, and I'd been teaching, and I would lock eyes with this guy, and I would just lock down. I'd be like, let me restart. And but finally came to me Thursday, and this is what he said. He said, hey, you know what? That was probably one of your better ones, right? And I was like, so it means I've had worse ones? Crush me, right? Right? And I'm sure he was trying to be nice. That wasn't very nice. It wasn't very nice at all, okay? So this word in the original language, it's not about being nice, but it's about this. It's about having to do with the capacity to encourage or to build into another person, right? To build them up. So here's the question. In your relationships, are you an encourager? Would you say that you are an encourager? Are you authentically able to speak into someone's life and build them up? Is that who you are? One of the leading researchers in marriages and what makes a marriage last is a guy named John Gottman. And some of you may know some of his works or writings. But what he found was this, that the presence of encouragement in a marriage is the primary predictor of whether or not a marriage will last. The presence of encouragement in a marriage is the primary predictor of whether or not a marriage will last. And they actually tracked couples on how much time they spent arguing or fighting, their negative interactions. And then they also tracked how much time they spent in positive interactions, like smiling, touching, paying compliments. And what they found with couples that stayed married, there was a very particular ratio of success between negative and positive reactions. There was a specific ratio of that. All right, let's move on. No, you want to know what the ratio is? Right, the ratio, here's the ratio, okay? Couples whose marriages had a ratio of at least 5-to-1, positive to negative, were the ones who lasted. At least 5-to-1, not 2-to-1, not 1-to-1, not 1-to-5, for those of you that may be a little more critical, right? All right, it's 5-to-1. And here's what else they found, that really happy couples and really healthy couples, really happy and really healthy couples, their ratio was closer to 20-to-1. Positive interactions to negative ones. 20-to-1. Does that convict anyone else in this room besides me? Right? I love my wife and I'm trying my best. 20-to-1, right? That's amazing. But here's what's crazy. What they found is that it wasn't rocket science stuff. It was things like this, like paying a compliment, like sending a note, reminding someone that you love them, or just making them laugh, right? These didn't have to be grand gestures. They were just these small, little positive interactions during the day. And This is what we're called to do. The writer of Hebrews actually says this, but encourage one another daily as long as it's called today. Pretty clear, right? Encourage each other daily as long as it's called today. Is it still called today? It's today. Then I should be encouraging people, right? But this is what we should be doing as Christians. Encouragement is something we should do all the time. We should be encouragement machines, right? And just hear this. So many people outside the church, and if you're an outside the church person and you're sitting here this morning, you may think this too, right? A lot of people outside the church, they see us as judgmental and condemning. But we ought to be known as encouragers. That should be our name. There's a story in the New Testament about a guy named Barnabas. Some of you know this story. This guy named Barnabas. He's written about in the book of Acts, and he was instrumental in the life of the Apostle Paul, the guy that's writing this, and the early church. But did you know that his real name is not Barnabas? For those of you who knew that this guy, do you know his real name wasn't Barnabas? You know what it was? Kevin. No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't Kevin. That's just the name that Will wants to be if he could go back and rename himself. He just came up with that with dinner the other night. He's like, Dad, could we go back and can I be Kevin? It's like, I don't even know where you got Kevin. I don't know where that came from, right? But Barnabas, his real name wasn't Barnabas. That was just a nickname, right? His real name, okay, in case you didn't know it, his real name was Joseph, right? In Acts chapter 4, this is what it says. Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, right? There was a guy named Joseph who was such an encourager that his friends just renamed him Mr. Encourager, okay? Anybody need me to get you that t-shirt this week? Okay, I don't know if anybody of us are walking around there going, man, there comes Mr. Encourager. I'm so glad he's here, right? But it's what we're supposed to be. That should be me and you. And so my question is, how's your encouragement ratio going? Not just in your marriage, but in all of your relationships. Are you hitting 5-1, right? Parents with our children. Because I know it's tough days. We got 4 of them, right? That's 20-1 by itself if I'm doing the math, right? Man, just keep it, or 20-5. Oh, I get 5. Okay, I get 5 negative. 4, 5. There it is, right? But it's hard. But ultimately, it's worth it. And so here's what's it like to be on the other side of your encouragement? How's that going for the world? Here's the other one, humility. We're going to speed up here. Humility. And we won't stay on this one long because we're all so humble, right? Right? I'm going to stay here long. I mean, I don't like to brag, but I do like to tell people how humble I am, right? No, actually, we don't have to stay here long because it's pretty self-explanatory, and we talk about that a lot here. But we live in a world that's constantly preaching self-promotion. You, right? And how can you get yours and make your name great? I remember this recruiting story. This guy was contrasting 2 great coaches, Mike Krzyzewski at Duke and Bobby Bowden at Florida State. And he tells this story that Mike Krzyzewski would go sit down in the living room. And at the end of his pitch, he would just build them up, and he would go, and then he'd pull out the Duke jersey, and he would lay it down on the coffee table, and he would say, we need you to go out there and help us make this name great, right? They said Bobby Bowden would sit in that same living room when he was doing football recruiting, with his players, and he would sit down, and he'd pull out a jersey too, but instead of laying down on the front, he'd flip it over on the back, and they'd have their name embroidered on the top of it, and he'd say, we need you to come to Florida State and make that name great, right? And it's just our culture. And I love Bobby Bowden. I know he's not all about it, but I'm just saying, right? We live in a culture that says, no, promote you. You make you great. You do that. But Paul, when he was writing to another group of his friends, he said this. He said, actually, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, right? And we work on this a lot at our house. And we've actually tried to make kind of a little game out of it. And we just really work on how can I put others' interests in front of my own. We try to celebrate it when it happens. Really big deal. It's like who will give if you got cookies on the table? Who will give up the biggest cookie to somebody else? If the ice cream's running low, right? Who will give up the last scoop of ice cream for somebody else in the house? Who will give up shotgun? That's a big deal right now if you got some teenagers around, right? Who will give up shotgun for somebody else to ride in the front seat of the car? And we're really trying to build this up and practice it. And man, just so you know how that's going, we stink at it at our house. We're terrible, right? But we're practicing it, right? We're trying to get better, okay? And that's the process that we're called to. And so how are you doing? What's it like to be on the other side of your humility? And if you answered that, you need to start working again because you're not humble, right? We need to work on this. It's part of the process. The fourth one is this, gentleness. And another word for gentleness is meekness. And understand, meekness gets a bad name, and so does gentleness sometimes, because in Scripture sometimes that gets lumped in with weakness. Not what that means. In fact, the literal definition is one of them is power under control. It's power under control. It's that I have the power to do it, but on your behalf, I'm going to be very gentle with how I let my power disperse. I'm going to be very gentle with you and for you. And then there's another definition that I really love. It's this, and it says meekness is a willingness to waive one's rights for a good cause. I have the rights. It's my right if I want to take it, but I'll waive my rights for a good cause. It doesn't demand that I be satisfied. It's the opposite of rudeness and abrasiveness. There's a story about Taylor University, a Christian college in Indiana. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but this was years and years ago. They were super excited to learn that they were getting an exchange student. And this was before exchange students were popular. This just didn't happen much. This was a huge deal. They were getting an international student who was coming in. And this dude was incredibly smart. It was going to benefit the whole school that he had chosen them. So it was a super big deal. And he had earned the right to call some of his own shots on campus. And when he arrived, the president of the university took him on a tour. They went around and saw everything. And when the tour was over, the president asked this guy, Sam, he said, he'd seen everything. So where would you like to live? Like, where on campus do you want to live? And this is what the guy replied. If there's a room that no one wants, give that room to me. I love that. If there's a room that no one wants, give that room to me. And the story goes that the president just started to cry. And he said, we've had thousands and thousands of Christian students come through here, many who were asked the same question, and not one of them has ever responded that way. If there's a room that no one wants, give that room to me. That's the kind of meekness that Jesus would talk about in his teachings and that he led as an example in his life. Stuff like, if there's a job that no one wants to do, I'll do it. If there's a kid that no one wants to eat with at lunch, I'll eat with that kid. If there's a piece of toast that's burnt, I'll take that piece. If there's a service time that's less convenient for people, I'll worship at that service. If it's a hardship that someone has to endure, I'll endure that hardship with them or for them. If there's a sacrifice someone needs to make, I'll make that sacrifice. That's incredible, right? That's good stuff right there. And that's the kind of meekness that Jesus was talking about. So here's the question. What's it like to be on the other side of your meekness? What's it like to be on the other side of your rights? Right? I wish I could say it's always been good for others, but I don't know that it has. And this is something that could cost us relationships. So I'll keep moving. Patience. Oh man, you were waiting for this one, weren't you, right? Patience. What's it like to be on the other side of your patience? Okay, we can move on from that one, right? Some of you may know, some of you may read multiple verses of the Bible. The King James for this one is great because it's got this great word for patience. It's long suffering, right? That makes it better, Paul, thanks, right? Hey, good luck with patience, long suffering, okay? It's in the word. It's just locked in there with what it is. But the idea of patience, it's the time dimension to relational health. Are you in it for the long haul? Are you in it when it's not easy? Are you in it when you really want to bail and get the heck out? Are you in it when it feels easier to give up on that person? We're really working hard on this with Ellie, and sometimes she gets it and sometimes she doesn't. And the other day I started doing something, and we've got to where if she starts, we just kind of go about our task and we're teaching her patience. But the other day she started, she was daddy, 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 daddy. And Ellie's 4, right? Daddy, 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 daddy. And so I just kept working. And then she started going, Andrew, Andrew, Andrew. Right? I was like, holy cow. And finally I stopped what I was doing and I said, well, what? What is it? And this is what she said. Are you being patient right now? I said, I'm sure trying. But patience in a relationship with someone means, and hear this. This is huge. It means we have to carry what they carry, right? It means that their sins and their struggles and their imperfections, right, are ours to help bear. That's patience. That's what patience does. It bears with one another. And this is so important. We don't do that because we should. We do it because this is what God did for us on the cross. That he bore our shame, he bore our sin, he bore our burden, and he bore our debt. And he did it instead of walking away. Instead of running away when that would have been the easier thing to do. So we're called to be patient because God's patient with us. And he's also something else with us, which is the last one. It's this. It's forgiveness. Right? And I think Paul put this one last because this is what's hardest in relationships. This is absolutely what's hardest. And it's hard because we hurt each other. Because that's what we do. At some point in your life, someone is going to hurt you. Actually, at some point in your life, everyone you know will probably hurt you. Some way. In some minor or major way. But, when that happens, you and I have a choice to make. We're going to forgive, or we're going to withhold that forgiveness. And it's not easy stuff. But here's what we know. Over time, our souls can't thrive without forgiving. Unforgiveness will choke out the life in us and will leave us bitter, hard people. And we don't just forgive because people deserve it. In fact, probably most of the time they don't. But again, we forgive, one, for us, for our hearts, to still be able to move and grow. But number two, we forgive because we've been forgiven, right? Because this is what Jesus did for us on the cross, that he forgave us. Because you will not come up with motivation to forgive on your own. You won't. It's not there. It's not natural. The only place we find the ability to forgive is through the forgiveness God has given to us and allows us to offer to someone else. And this is a hard one, but I would ask you, what's it like to be on the other side? In fact, I'll just own this one. What's it like to be on the other side of my forgiveness? Right? And this is a question I ask every day. Because there's still some places that there's some people that are probably not on a good side of that. And I'm still working on. I'm just trying to get there. But I encourage you because it's worth the work. How are we doing, right, with these things? How are you doing with compassion for people you don't know? How are you doing with kindness and encouragement? How are you doing with your 5 to 1? With the relationships in your life? How are you doing with humility? Right? How are you doing when it comes to gentleness and dispersing your power in ways that don't hurt others? How are you doing with your patience and your forgiveness? A lot of you know, because I say it a lot, but it's just true, and I don't mind saying it. But my parents are two of my spiritual heroes. My mom and dad are just absolutely amazing. But especially with these things we're talking about. They're really, really good at this stuff. And they're not perfect, right? They're not perfect at it. Well, Becky Brown might be. But she might be perfect at this. But they're incredible at it. They're amazing at this. But my wonder and awe at their abilities in these areas used to be frustration. I used to be so frustrated with them and this stuff. And here's why. Because it looked to me like when they would be these things for others that they were just getting taken advantage of. Right? In fact, there's one writer who calls these virtues, right? He says, these are actually the virtues of weakness. Humility and kindness and compassion and gentleness. It's like they're just weakness. Right? And I used to get so frustrated because I felt like people were taking advantage of my parents, but they would always say stuff like this. It's not getting taken advantage of if you know what you're doing. Right? If you know what's happening and you continue to do it on purpose, you're not getting taken advantage of. And we feel like we know what we're doing, and maybe someday it'll make sense. And someday it actually did, but I would get frustrated until through the years, I saw them get to lead people into a relationship with Jesus, not because of their knowledge, and they have a lot of knowledge, those two do. Not because of, and not by arguing theology. And they can both argue theology with anyone. And certainly not by judging people there. But because pivotal moments in these people's lives, when they couldn't think of anyone else to turn to, they turned to the people who had loved them and loved them well. And love wins, right? And that's what all of these things add up to. In fact, if you read on down in verse 14, Paul later, he says that. He says, look, he said, all these things, they're wrapped up and held together by this one idea, and it's just love. That when Jesus said, love God and then go love people, these were the love people things he meant, right? Compassion and kindness and humility, and meekness, patience, right? Forgiveness. These were the things that he was talking about, and that's why this is so important. Because this is how Jesus provided relationship to us. And that's what makes it great, right? His rescue of us is just a combination of his compassion, wasn't it? His compassion toward us, his kindness to us, his humility on behalf of us, his patience with us, his gentleness to us, and his forgiveness for us. And that's love, right? And he says, now go give that to people. And just for a second, we're done. Imagine a world where we grown-ups were trying every day to get this right. Not perfect, but we were trying. Intentionally, like Paul said, we were getting up and putting on these things. Okay, I'm going to put on some compassion. I hadn't seen anybody yet. I'm going to go ahead and put it on. I'm going to get my kindness ready, right? I'm going to get my humility ready. I'm going to get my patience ready. I'm going to practice it today. I'm going to work on it. Imagine what that would do for our marriages, right? I'm going to get my 5 to 1 in, and man, if it's a good day, I'm going 10 to 1 today. I'm going 10 to 1. I'm going for it, right? Imagine that for our kids, for our friends. Imagine that for a world that doesn't know who Jesus is yet. If we could get this part right. And so I'm going to keep working on this because grown-ups know we are never finished growing. We're not there. There's still work to be done, and growing up requires work. But if life is made up of relationships, and it is, then this is work worth doing. If for no one else than the people that you love the most, start there. And let's just try to get this part right. Let's check our guts and let's just be compassionate with people, and let's encourage people like crazy. And in fact, I debated on whether to tell you this, but I'm just going to tell you because we're real right here around here, right? I had this guy, he came from a really rough background, rough life, but he's one of those people that my parents had just loved the mess out of, right? They just loved him. And this dude had no filter, had no church background, no Jesus background. And so he came up to me one day, and this is what he said, and I'm going to quote him. I'm going to quote them. This is what he said. He said, man, your mom and dad just encouraged the hell out of me. So I remember looking at him going, well, all right. And, but I walked away from there, and here's what I thought later. I was like, maybe that's more true than we know. Maybe they encouraged the hell right out of that dude, right? Or maybe they encouraged that dude right out of hell. I don't know, right? But the way they treated him and loved him changed his life. Because the way Jesus treated and loved us changed ours. That's why we know it works. And that's why we go, give it away. This matters. People matter. And this was a huge deal to God. So this week, right, here's your homework. Just ask yourself. I'm not even going to tell you to ask others. What's it like to be on the other side of me? Is this moving people toward Jesus? Is my life, is my compassion, my humility, my gentleness, my meekness, my forgiveness, my patience? Is it moving people? Is it shining a light on? Is it pointing people toward Jesus? Or pointing them away? And man, just know, there's no more important thing we can do in this world than point people in the direction of Jesus. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father,